Without further ado, welcome to Coffee Connection Live. We are so honored to be joined tonight by Corie Weathers, who's a military spouse and also a licensed professional counselor, to be talking about the current situation in Afghanistan. Welcome, Corie. Thank you so much for being here. I would love for you to tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to be back for another Coffee Connections. It's been a while. We did the USO deployment series for a while, and so I think this is a really good reason to get everybody together and have a conversation like we are tonight. Like Liz said, I am a military spouse myself. We are stationed here at Fort Hood, and I am also a licensed professional counselor. And so I focus on working with couples and spouses, service members as well. And so it's just my heart's passion to make sure that we are all doing well and we're thriving in this very chaotic, crazy lifestyle that we all have. And so I think tonight's topic is super, super important for us to be able to come together as a tribe and as a village to talk about what's been a really rough 2 weeks. And so I kind of want to start off by saying it's okay if it's not been rough for you. Everybody kind of has different feelings for different reasons. And so I think we'll be able to kind of nail down a little bit of why and how we can help each other out. So Liz, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you for being here, Corie. Let's jump right in because even if people aren't feeling it personally, it's been a rough 18 months. It's been a rough year and a half. There's so much going on. In addition now to the pandemic, we have another deadly Afghanistan conflict that our military community is wrapped up in. And emotions are pretty raw. So how can we begin to process everything happening right now?
Man, that's like the question of the month, right? And question of the year. We thought that we were kind of just on the other side of getting back to some level of normalcy, whatever that new normal. We hate to use that phrase, right? But in our world, definitely a new normal. And then like you hear news of the withdrawal, and wherever you were as far as knowing that that withdrawal was going to happen, whether you were tracking it, whether you weren't, or whether it was a surprise to you. I mean, there's all kinds of like emotions. This is my cat Meg, by the way. You guys will meet her over the course of the evening. It's kind of her room too. Um, but I think that wherever you were when kind of this started to unfold, it brought up so many emotions. And I think we surprised ourselves at all the emotions that we ended up having about all of this. I think it just was, in some ways, it caught us off guard. And so I think to answer your question, how can we begin to process this? Thank you, Nicole, for saying hi to Meg. She says hi back. um, but I think how to process it is, I think we start like we are starting tonight. And I think that is acknowledging that it's a significant event in our life. It's a significant event in our marriage. It's worthy of conversation. Even if you feel like you're doing fine with it, even if it feels like your spouse is doing fine with it, it is definitely something that has rocked our community. And so it's worthy of us just having a conversation about it and creating better understanding. And so starting from the beginning of what did it bring up in you and why is a great place to start. So I know we're going to touch base on a lot of that this evening.
All right. Well, so for those whose spouses are currently deployed, or those who are in Germany or in any of the countries that are dealing with this directly, and maybe we can't hear from them regularly, what are some healthy ways to pass the time? Rather than just staring at the phone, staring at the computer, waiting to hear something, what are some ways to get through these long days and nights?
Yeah, and I see somebody's already started to put some questions in the Q&A box. Please do that. So please, we want to see the chat going, and we're going to be monitoring the chat. And so thank you guys for giving that feedback. And I think I would love, Liz, before I answer that question, I would love to just kind of go to the chat for a second, and I would love to hear from you guys. What do you need tonight out of this time that we're going to spend together? Like, what are you? I mean, you brought in such great questions when you registered, and we're going to tend to those. But if we could take a moment and just give us like, what were you hoping to get out of our time so that we know if we're like hitting the mark or not? A virtual hug, right? Virtual hugs are awesome. And it's a great point, because you were asking Liz a second ago, like these long days and nights of not just processing what's going on the media and everything, but kind of facing like a second wave of the pandemic. People are already asking, like, I don't even know if I can walk into this next season and know what to do with myself, right? And so I think to start with, I think that we've never done well as a community. We've never done well as spouses, I believe, to be uneducated, right? When I went overseas, that was the first thing I realized, is that I had not educated myself. I think I had stayed far, far away from whatever was happening in the war, or whatever my service member was being asked to do. Maybe it was a little bit of denial. Maybe it was just I was too busy and I was focused on what was in front of me. But one of the things that I really kind of had this wake up call and realizing I really didn't understand what we were doing in Afghanistan. I don't think I fully understood what we were doing in Iraq, or wherever things were happening, right? And that doesn't mean that we should be like resident experts and become subject matter experts, but I do think that getting the right information is important. I think we do need to stay educated because it actually brings our anxiety down when we have information. But of course, it's like this spectrum of extremes, right? So if we find ourselves like really obsessing on that information, and that's the only thing that is kind of like the only thing that we're inputting into our lives and into our mind and into our heart, it's actually going to raise our anxiety like way going through the roof, right? And so I think that there is a delicate balance. If we can, I work really well when I have extremes in my mind, like what's like worst case scenario and what's best case scenario. Like what are my extremes? And if I can figure out what those extremes are and try to land in the middle, then I know I'm going to be in a healthier spot. So I don't want to be um either uneducated or in denial or not know anything that's going on. And at the same time, I don't want to be obsessed and overly worried and over concerned and spinning myself up. So the middle ground needs to be, where do I get the best information that feels right and healthy, that I can feel like I know what's going on, and then make good decisions based off of what's happening in my world. And then I need to turn it off, right? Then I need to turn it off for the day and really kind of put my chin down in the best sort of way, right? And as far as, I think about like the little ones, right? Like I chin down and like what's right in front of me, and really focus on the things that I have direct control over, and how do I be the best person that I can be with those that are around me. And I think that that's kind of at least where I'm encouraging other people to go, where I'm trying to encourage myself to go. But Liz, just to normalize this, in the first week to 2 weeks, I definitely had the same temptation of just wanting to devour too much information and allow myself to get worked up. And I even had to take a step back. So I think it's good for us to, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's what's happening or what was happening in Afghanistan, now what's going to happen after Afghanistan. Like, I think it's important to get what you need in order to feel like you are knowledgeable about the situation around you. And then let's get back to life. Let's get back to relationships and be the best version of ourselves. Does that help?
So then I know we had a lot of questions about people saying, well, like you said, I want to watch the news, I want to be informed, but when is it too much? And when is it okay to shut it down and turn on Netflix? And you're kind of giving us permission to feel that way and to be struggling with it, and that's normal. But
Yeah.
to know that it's okay to get what you need and then step away and focus on the here and now. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think, again, thinking extremes, right? Netflix is great for being able to veg out and just turn, like, my husband and I, we work with people and emotions and feelings all week long, right? And so when we get to the weekend, we call it our things not people, right? And so that's when we're gardening, I'm gardening, or when Matt is doing something with his hands instead of with his mind, right? And so being able to find that balance. And so Netflix is it's like a thing, right? It's this thing that we can kind of turn on and kind of veg out and turn our minds off. And that's healthy, right? As long as we think about the spectrum of, if you or your spouse is really kind of numbing out, and we're going to video games and Netflix, and we're not talking and we're not having tough conversations when you're feeling, and you're not processing and moving forward on some of this information, then we probably are leaning on that extreme of numbing out and really not tending to what we need to tend to, right? But again, we don't want to be over consumed and feel that that's selfish to turn off the news, right? It's not selfish to set healthy boundaries for yourself, for your mind, for your heart, for who you need to be with those right in front of you. That is not selfish. So please, if you hear me say nothing else tonight, it is not selfish for you to take care of yourself and to set healthy boundaries. And it is okay for you to turn off information and come back a couple days later, because guess what? The whole world is consuming information. If there's something that's happening that you need to know about, chances are somebody's going to let you know. right? And so give yourself that break and just be able to take care of yourself and maybe take a weekend, take a couple days to turn things off. But that doesn't mean that we disconnect so much that we don't talk about it at all. Does that answer your question, Liz?
It does. And it kind of leads into my next question. You touched on it. Maybe our spouse, those of us who are not active duty, or I have to stop and say, we USO folks, we have colleagues who spent a lot of time in Afghanistan too. So I hope some of them are viewing this, because I think it's going to help them as well. And it's going to help us know how to talk with them. So our loved ones who spent time over there deployed, what if they just don't want to talk about it? Maybe it's their personality, but maybe it's their, like you said, going to the other end of the spectrum. How many times is it okay to maybe bring it up with them?
Such a good
Does that make
question.
sense?
Yeah, such a good question. In fact, one of my favorite, experiences with the USO was when I was over in Afghanistan for that one day that I got to go to Afghanistan, and I was shocked to find out that there was a USO in this remote location in Afghanistan. And I was like surprised and excited, and also like, wow, like somebody cares about our service members and my husband so much that they would live in Afghanistan for 5 years just to serve at that USO and make sure he has the warm cup of coffee that I wish I could be giving to him. Right. It almost felt like it was an extension of me, right? When I couldn't do that and somebody else could. And so when we think about so like when I think about that USO center trying to get out of Afghanistan, when I think about the service members that are serving there who were sent there trying to get everybody out, there's a lot of conversation about how do we tend to the multiple feelings that our service members are experiencing. And so let me address specifically those that are um, that have and are directly responding to the Afghanistan situation. Um, I have a great colleague of mine that talked about how sometimes in marriage, we want to rush in and we want to like solve things and tend to things and we want to make everything better. And sometimes it needs more time than that. Sometimes we've got to give more time and space. It's kind of, we're kind of going through the aftershocks of what happened with Afghanistan and our response to it. And so all of us are still trying to figure out what we think and feel about it. And so if you have a service member that was there, especially there dealing with the airport situation, special forces, if you have those that were civilians that were working over there, whatever that looks like, I think it's about giving some time and space and giving them a chance to process what that looks like. And so as a spouse, I would just encourage you to, number one, if you haven't asked directly, I think it's safe to do that. Directly ask your spouse, hey, how you doing? That was like, I don't even know what you experienced over there. How are you doing with all of that? And take them at their word. If they say I don't know, that's the answer. I don't know, and let that be okay. If they want to unpack it, then that's our cue to just whatever they need to say in that moment is what they need to say, and we just kind of sit with them in that. If they need more time and they're not ready to talk about it, that's okay too. So if you haven't directly asked, then it's okay for you to do that. If you have and you kind of are kind of verging on that, like we're on the verge of nagging, right? We're on the verge of asking too much. That's where I think we can shift the question, right? Instead of how are you doing? What did you experience? Or do you have PTSD? Like, what's all those questions? Instead, I would say turn it into a question, and you can get so much from your spouse by just saying, here, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. One is, hey, what do you need right now? What do you need? And that can be, they can answer that on anything, right? What do they need to process this? It can mean, what do you need today? It can mean, what do you need right this second? What do you need during the season? They can answer that however they want. But what do you need right now, and how can I help you with that, right? What could I specifically do to help meet whatever need that you have? And you might be surprised. They might come back and say, I just need time and space. I need to veg out a little bit. And that's our cue to be able to respond back and say, I want to absolutely give you what you need on that. Can we just make an agreement that you'll come back? That you'll kind of call that time in and that you'll let me know, like, is it okay if I check on you in a day or so? And just ask them, who can I best be for you? That's my other favorite phrase is, who can I best be for you right now? And we're going to get to here in a minute, because I know our spouses are feeling a lot and you are exhausted. And that feels a little scary to say, who can I be for you? Right? When there's everybody has so much need right now yourselves. So we're going to address that here in a second. But as it relates to if your spouse has just come home from Afghanistan, if they're really struggling with this news, um, I kind of like whoever has this is hard for me to say, so hear it from my heart, but whoever kind of has the loudest issue right now kind of needs to go first. But that doesn't mean we never check on ourselves, okay? It just means we're going to go one at a time. And we got to make sure that there is a back and forth. But if your spouse is especially struggling, let's kind of, because if they're really struggling, they're really not going to be able to meet your needs. So it's how can I meet your need and get you to a little bit better spot? Then I can take that turn. And this marriage should be a dance. It should be a dance going back and forth. And if it's never a dance going back and forth, then that's a red flag that we need to shift some things. So you don't want to nag, and you don't want to also avoid. It's that spectrum again, right? That's going to be the theme of the night. Where's your spectrum? Where's your extremes? How do you stay in the middle? How do you tend to what's going on without being overwhelming?
So then let's take it to a more macro questioning at this point. Some of our friends and even our family members who aren't in the military community have been asking us recently, and I say us, the royal us. We're getting a lot of civilians questioning right now, how are you doing? How is your spouse doing? What do you think about everything? What are some healthy ways that we can explain this to our non-military friends?
I love this question. First of all, can I just say I'm so excited that you guys are blowing up the chat. Like, I can't even keep up. I'm so thankful that the USO team is manning that. So just know if you are asking questions, they are paying attention to your questions, so that we get to them. I don't want you to feel like we're ignoring you. I would love to see in the chat. Um, can we be very careful with this one, okay? But I think it's important because a lot of us have a lot of feelings about this right now, but I have this feeling if we do this, if we answer this question well, you have the ability to really tend to each other and tend to the tribe in this moment, okay? So if you're listening, say yes in the chat. Are you listening to me right now? Are you willing to try to be part of the tribe and actually tend to each other by I love it. I love it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Are you guys ready? Say yes if you're ready. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take just a moment and I want you to put one feeling word in the chat for how it has felt for you to have civilians and family members ask you how you're doing. Just a feeling word, not what you said back, not how you handled it, but I want you to just give what's the feeling word that came up in you when you've had anxious, loved, good. Give me some more words, overwhelmed, helpless. When external family members and civilians are suddenly curious about your life and want to know your opinion about things, right? Concerned, angry, awkward. I love this. Keep going. Speechless, annoyed, dismissive, irritated, angry. We're getting some themes now, right? I haven't been asked. That's a whole other, like, right? That's a whole other feeling. Uneducated. I'm going to say it, pissed off, right? That's kind of goes with angry and frustrated, misinformed. Okay, so all of these are great, right? And so when you have, and that's what I meant. Good job on that, guys, because being able to just put a feeling word in there, it validates each other, right? This is part of being the tribe to go, I felt kind of icky about that. Did everybody else feel that way? Right. And so being able to see within the tribe, this is kind of a normal feeling is very important. And that's part of why we're doing this, because we want to kind of come together. It's really hard to get hundreds of people together and have a conversation. Right. And so how do we validate each other's feelings and thoughts? And so let's go back to the question, right? How do we handle when we have civilians and family members that are asking how we're doing and asking what our opinions are? I think the first initial feeling that we've all experienced is kind of a frustrated feeling. And I think we're going to unpack why, right? It's a frustrated, kind of concerned, angry, like, why are you just now asking me? We've been in a 2-decade war, right? And let me tell you why I think that we had such an angry, frustrated, annoyed response, right? Some of you felt seen, right? And so I think it really depends on how somebody is approaching you. If they're coming to you lovingly with curiosity, Curiosity is always the way to go. Anytime we're creating understanding, when we can be curious about another person's experience, that's going to communicate love and care, right? But sometimes curiosity a little too late, right? And I think that's kind of what some of the community is feeling, can come across with this resentment. And so I think I know this is a long answer to your question, Liz, but I think what I'm trying to get at here is that our community, our spouse community, going through a 2-decade war, has gotten to a place where we are exhausted. The number one request that I get for speaking opportunities is on the topic of resentment. And a lot of that is coming from a place of exhaustion. And we've been told to put ourselves on the back burner, whether we're saying that to ourselves or we feel like someone else is saying it. We've not been taking care of ourselves. And in a lot of cases, I think we have felt like we didn't know how to take care of ourselves when the tempo has been so high and there's been so much asked of you. And so I think for the last 2 decades, regardless of when you came into the military, I think that we as families had to create our own meaning for this war on terrorism, right? For what was happening in Afghanistan. If you had to send your service member to Iraq or Afghanistan to respond to this, we had to create our own story of why that's okay. Why I have to be okay with, the fact that you have to leave and I have to take care of the kids or take care of myself or be without you. And so when we create that meaning for ourselves, and we've been doing that for 2 decades or for 10 years or 5 years, whatever, and really like kind of survival mode, trying to create that meaning. And then suddenly someone like sees suddenly what you're going through. And they're like, oh, there's a war in Afghanistan. How do you feel about that? And you're like, but I've been feeling this for 5 to 10 years, right? And so that's where that initial feeling of resentment and frustration comes from, because I think largely our spouse community has felt unseen, right? So I think, what do we do? As Dana says, I feel as though all of a sudden people out of nowhere are concerned, right? And that is kind of that feeling like we've felt invisible for a long time by, I think, a lot of circles. Again, whether that's true or perceived, it's definitely something we're struggling with. Somebody asks and then we have this kind of pushback that we feel. And so I think what I want to say is, number one, understand where that reaction is coming from. Understand that a lot of your fellow tribe members feel the same way, right? And then I think we have to have the what next, right? After we feel that emotion, after we feel that kind of annoying feeling, what do we do then? And so I find that once we acknowledge the resentment, acknowledge the frustration, then we have to turn towards who do we want to be, right? Who do you want to be? One of the phrases that's been going through my mind in the past week, especially, is, does it do you well to be angry? Asking myself that, does it do you well, Corie, to be angry? Right? And I think if I really kind of repeat that in my head over and over and over again, and I ask myself, is it doing me well to be angry? I think I realize it's not doing me well. So I have to figure out what to do with that anger. And so I think we embrace that their concern is coming out of a place of curiosity. It's coming from a good place, and that they do see you now. And this is your opportunity to educate. It's your opportunity to bring them in. It's your opportunity to be seen, this thing that you've been wanting for so long. And you can actually allow yourself to be seen by responding in kindness and education. Okay. So, how do you respond? I think you respond by kind of doing a self-care check really quick, not responding out of that anger, not lashing out at people, but instead kind of take that deep breath. They are being curious now. And if they are saying, Dana kind of brings up a good point, that if somebody is saying something hurtful, we set healthy boundaries, right? That we know where to place our kindness, where to place our education, where to place our best conversations. And we know where is it most useful and where is it going to be used for good. So it's a very long answer, but I want to make sure that you hear me say, don't lash out in your anger, and instead know where it's coming from. And then celebrate their curiosity, and let's be grateful. Let's turn that ship, right? It's a Navy ship, but we're going to turn it, and we're going to turn it towards the gratefulness that they're being curious now. And that's okay. And that's good.
I love that. Thank you. And I'm getting the sense that we have a lot of seasoned military spouses joining us. And I see you, Sarah Kemp. Thank you for putting that on there. I was hoping you'd be here tonight. What about the folks who are newer to this game, whether they're active duty or whether they're a brand new spouse, maybe they've just PCS to a place and their loved one got sent away immediately, and this is their first time dealing with it. How can we be especially mindful of them?
Brand new military. Do we have any brand new military spouses that are watching? I'd love to know if you're here. Our culture has multi generations, right? We have a lot. I loved how you said we have kind of our most seasoned spouses and families. We have mid-senior spouses, or mid-seasoned spouses, and then our brand new spouses, right? And so, first of all, I think it's recognizing that everybody has a different experience of the tribe. Everybody has a different experience of this issue. And everybody also has a different understanding of community and understanding of what they need right now. And some might have more need than others. And so, if you are a new spouse, this is a great time for those of you who are more seasoned. If you are doing okay, if your family's doing okay, if you feel like you're doing okay, you've kind of received this news and you're processing it pretty well, you've got a good support network around you, maybe your family's being extra kind, whatever that looks like. I think being able to step up and say, I have something to offer the new spouses, because I think what we're seeing right now is we've got to take a different look at mentoring, that mentoring isn't always who holds the most experience. It actually, right now, today, has more to do with who's in the better spot, who has the most bandwidth. And so, for those new spouses, it's okay for you to reach out and ask for help. It's okay for you to be scared and worried, and it's also okay for you to feel like if your service member has not deployed yet and the war on terrorism is ending, like, are you suddenly not part of the tribe? Like, yes, you absolutely are still part of the tribe and you have something to offer as well. And it's just as much a good time for our seasoned spouses to um, you can actually, the highest level of healing is actually serving. It's actually bringing purpose and meaning out of your pain, and it is helping someone else in the same or a similar spot, right? So if you are sitting there going, I'm just like so filled with like either frustration or I've done all the processing that I can do, it could be a great time for you to leverage that for good, not negativity and complaining, because we don't want to jade new spouses. We want to actually welcome them into the tribe. It could be a great way for you to bring in the next generation and love on them, because guess what? Those spouses still need education on etiquette and tradition and protocol and all those things that we still need to educate each other on, right? Not just Afghanistan. And so you can actually give back to our newer spouses. So don't be afraid to reach up. Don't be afraid to reach down. Everybody's kind of having a different angle and perspective on things.
I love that. Thank you. We have a lot of questions from folks who register to join us tonight. Before I jump into those, I want to check in with Nicole, who's manning the Q&A box. Nicole, hello. What do people want to know in the Q&A box tonight?
Yes, so we've got quite a few questions coming in, and thank you everyone for tuning in and asking questions. Corie, thank you again for joining us for this special edition, but we're going to start with a question at the top. So we have a question that says, I'm hating this new normal with the pandemic, dealing again with another deployment. How do I deal with the stay at home again, stay at home again without feeling depressed? So I think if you can read into that question, Corie, just basically dealing with another deployment and not getting to that depressed state.
Yeah, and I just got through with a deployment that was during COVID, and know exactly kind of what you feel like you're going into. And I'll be honest, I think if I was going into that situation, I would be a little concerned about myself as well, right? It is scary, and it is scary more for our well-being at the thought of like either being protective again and locked down, and doesn't matter again where you are in opinions and politics. This is really about we already feel like we're isolated. We already feel like something big is shifting in our life with the deployment. And on top of that, I could be limited by community, limited for my kids' sake, and all of that. So I think, first of all, the fact that you are already looking out for your mental health, and you're already asking the question, how do I keep myself from fill in the blank, right? Going downhill, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, like you're already preparing yourself for where you could go if you start to find yourself kind of going downhill, right? And so I think that that's already a good sign. And so being able to be attuned with your body, it's called intuitive healing, intuitive thoughtfulness on your body and on your mind. And so being able to go, you know what, I have a tendency, I knew this about me last year, let's say, I have a tendency of kind of going into isolation and not taking good care of myself. So this time, so what can you do this time going in that you know is going to help you stay afloat, right? How important is that community, and how are you going to get the community that you need, and creative ways for you to get that community? So again, thinking about that spectrum, maybe we take our lessons learned from last year and we don't try to get all of our community from Zoom, right? We kind of tried that, we got fatigued with it, right? So we kind of need to find our way in the middle, that Zoom can be helpful, Facebook Lives can be helpful, all of those kinds of things can be helpful, but we also need to find a way to go outside of our house and have a conversation with our neighbor across the street, right? There's ways that we can kind of check the boxes and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we aren't sitting in our house as if there's a tornado outside of our house, right? There's not a tornado. Well, I hope there's not a tornado outside of your house. We had a Texas ice storm, so I know things can happen. But my point is that what are the areas of self-care that will keep you in a good place? Community is one. Doing something that you enjoy, something that brings joy to just you for no other reason than just you. I took up the cello during the deployment. Like I know, Liz, right? Like I realized during the deployment, I've always wanted to play the cello, and now I'm 44. Why haven't I learned how to play the cello? But it's turned into the one thing that I really look forward to every day, right? So what is that thing that you've been wanting to do for a really long time that's just for you? I have no desire to perform the cello for anybody. It is just for me to do, just for me, right? So find that thing that sparks joy in your life that you can do in your home or outside, and then you go and you do that thing regularly, right? So be very aware of yourself and be very aware of the things that you are adding into your life that is just for you so that you stay in a good place. Great question.
Excellent. I have another question. This is from a Navy spouse, and she's been at many joint commands. And she said, I'm not directly affected in the sense of having anyone close to me deployed to Afghanistan in the past 20 years. Yet I am feeling a lot for friends that are affected by this. And I have been checking on a few people. My frustration comes from so many civilians with no military ties having a lot to say on the subject. Is it best to tune it out, or would it be better for me to support my friends, but asking civilian friends and acquaintances to be gentle with their words, especially if those words are trying to represent how those have been deployed should feel? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It does. So I love this question. I think we've all been there. We've all been in that situation. And so I'm going to partially answer that with something that Matt said when I interviewed him for the Afghanistan series. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I asked him kind of a similar question, like, how did you feel when everybody started to say things, right? And so I think it's really helpful when we ask our spouses or ask those who've actually been to Afghanistan, like, how do you feel about that? Because then that cues me for how I should feel about it, maybe. Even though both of us are allowed to have different feelings about it. And one of his answers was, you know what, if they haven't been there and they don't understand it, then like his words were like, whatever. Meaning he was kind of have to set that boundary for himself. And it was not something that he felt like he could explain to anybody. And so he just was setting a boundary for himself as a service member to say, I don't think that I can be the person that educates you on this right now. And I think that that's a very healthy boundary. And so I think that my second part to answering that question would be, I think we have to know our sphere of influence. Okay. I think that we all have a sphere of influence where within that circle of people or within the groups, certain groups of people, we have influence within that group, right? So think about like maybe some family members, some very close friends that are, again, being very curious and they have opinions, and you have influence in being able to educate them, maybe help them understand. So your question of, should I help them understand that this is how military families are feeling, so you shouldn't say those things? Well, I think if they're being curious and they're within your sphere of influence, meaning if you actually give them, words and education and things to thoughtfully say, then they're more likely to respond and learn from that, and they want to do something different. But I think we also have to remember that there are a lot of people outside that sphere of influence, a lot of people. And so I think we have to remind ourselves, where does my influence end? Right? At what point am I trying to blast things? And I'm not saying this person is, but we all have this desire to kind of want to educate everybody and calm everybody down. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is that really effective and productive? Like, where can I take that energy and channel it where it's most influential? Because that's a great place to put that energy. So I love the fact that you're asking that question, because all of us who've had spouses that went to Afghanistan or have been affected by Afghanistan, like, we feel so seen and loved by you, the person that asked that question, that you would kind of go on our behalf and kind of like, help to calm the people down when we have no words. And so we need people like you to be able to kind of have those conversations, but we definitely wouldn't want you to waste your effort and get frustrated and then find yourself also resentful. So just keep in mind what that sphere of influence looks like.
Excellent. Okay. And then this one's in regards to mental health. How can we be more supportive and valuable to our service members coming home from Afghanistan? Do you have any tools, mindfulness techniques? If a service member has suicidal thoughts, how can we talk to them? If a service member is depressed, how can we support them? So going into that, are there any good books, podcasts, research articles that you can share?
Yeah, such a big question. So when it comes to mental health, let me do a very fast high level on mental health, right? So just as a reminder, you as a civilian, as a spouse, can go get mental health as you need to want to. TRICARE is changing that a little bit on whether or not you need a referral, but the easiest way is Prime. It's probably best to get a referral. You don't technically need it, but they might be asking for it. But if you're standard, go out. You can even see an out-of-network provider and get the help that you need. When it comes to a service member, it gets a little bit sticky with red tape, right? So when we're talking about how do they get help, again, I would first go to your spouse and say, what do you need right now? How can I best support you? Who can I best be for you? How can I be an advocate for you? So if you start to see them decline and they're going into depression and suicidal ideation, I think, again, this is where we kind of get into, where is our influence best, right? Some of you have relationships with your spouse where you have incredible influence on things like that, where you can go to your spouse and say, hey, I'm really worried about you. I'm seeing you really check out. You're checking out with the family. You're checking into video games and nothing else. You're not engaged. I'm really concerned about you. And your spouse will respond to you bringing that up. Like, how can I help you and support you? And what does help look like for you, right? Matt, again, in that same interview said, I asked him, what do you need? Like, what do you need right now? And his answer was, it wasn't me. He didn't need me. His answer was actually, I think I need to go call my friends. And I loved that answer because it clearly outlined exactly what he needed to make sure he stayed in a good place. And so sometimes when you see I'm not saying Matt was necessarily declining, but he was struggling with all of this stuff, right? And so when you ask your spouse, like, what is it that you need? Sometimes that depression or even those thoughts of, suicide is often, obviously, it is very scary if it comes up. But the initial thoughts is not that they actually want to die. They actually just want the pain to stop, right? They're not actually wanting to end their life initially. Usually their thoughts with, I just want all this to stop. I want the stress to stop. I want the pain to stop. I want the thoughts to stop. And so being able to advocate and say, all right, how do we start to turn that ship into a better place? And so being able to say, do you need to call a friend? Right? I can't even tell you, like, one of the number one things of suicide prevention is call a friend, right? Call someone who understands. So encouraging your service member to call a battle buddy, and it's okay that it's not you. Can I just say that? It's okay that they're not coming directly to you, because there are things that I'm never going to understand that Matt went through because I didn't go through it with him, and that's okay. And there's things that we've gone through that our spouse cannot understand, and that's okay. That's why we come to this tribe, right? So when it comes to mental health, it's a little bit harder depending on what your spouse does on whether or not they're going to be quick to go to mental health. But I will say, very quick under the radar is things like Military One Source, which is non-medical care. Coaching is really effective as well. It's under the radar. Or going through an out-of-network private pay is also under the radar. But going to your spouse and saying, I think you need to be psychologically evaluated, is not going to go well. Okay, it's not going to go well. And so who can you be as far as an advocate? And as far as resources go, I think there's a lot of great podcasts out right now to support service members and veterans on what they're going through. I just recently in the last week picked up a podcast put out by the SOF community. It's actually called SOFcast. Instead of podcast, it's SOF, SOF, Special Forces. And there was a fantastic interview, I think his name was Chad, where he actually talked about how coming out of the SOF community, how he was suicidal, and he walked through like what helped, what didn't help. And just being able to hear the stories of people who've been there and the struggles that they had and how they pulled themselves out of it, stories are so powerful. So that was a fantastic podcast. And there's lots of other podcasts. The Afghanistan series that I just did is addressing those questions as well. Not suicidal questions, but how do we process our feelings? So I would definitely start looking into where there's veterans and service members that are actually sharing their stories. But let me also stress that you don't always have to do all the work for your spouse. Like, again, ask them what they need and then champion them to find the resources that they need. And if they're struggling with that, how can I help you? Who can I best be for you to help you get the help that you need? Do you see the difference? Okay, great question. Big
So
question.
good. And I'm going to do one more and then I'll pass it back over to Liz. And this one is, this spouse is asking, how do you find your military tribe when you just moved to a non-military community? She said all the team members are single with no family. So just kind of helping a new spouse out right now,
Yeah,
or a non-military community spouse.
Yeah, I've been there when we were stationed in Charlottesville, like hardly many families, and it was an intelligence, so people were like too scared to get together. So I totally understand what that's like. So I would just say, first of all, our community and finding support is number one crucial, right? You cannot do this life by yourself. And so if you are in a place where there's not a lot of community, a lot of our National Guard, a lot of our reservists feel the same way. Number one, find community somewhere. I don't care if you join a running group or a hobby group that's similar to something that you love to do. I don't care if you sit with a bunch of other people and sew blankets. Like whatever your thing is, find a common hobby and find community of any kind, whether it's in your church locally or a book club that's happening in your neighborhood. Start with some kind of community. And then I think you're going to find there's a lot more military and retirees and veteran spouses out there than you realize. It's going to take you a little bit of time to find them. But if you start asking the right questions and see where they all are, I think you'll be able to find them pretty quickly. And nowadays on Facebook, you can find a group for almost anything locally if you look for it. But start to ask those questions. But number one, first and foremost, find community of some kind. Don't hold out and wait for the perfect community, and they have to all be military spouses. Find a place to plug in first, and then kind of branch out based off of the unique needs that you have. Great question.
Fantastic answer. And our team who's working the chat box put a bunch of links in there just now, one to Corie's Afghanistan series, as well as that soft podcast. I know they're probably going to pop in there that we also have the USO Military Spouse Facebook group. Thank you, Nicole. You can find several thousand of us military spouses in there as well. It's a great community connect and to find people who live near you so that you can start to make those local connections as well. So, Corie, we had several people ask this very, very heavy question, sort of the 8,000-pound gorilla in the room. And that is, how can the folks who served over there begin to tell themselves that their time was not spent in vain? How can they still feel that it was worth it, seeing everything that's going on?
Yeah, this is a huge question. I would say this is probably the biggest underlying issue that I'm seeing. I mean, there's multiple, but this is one of the big ones. And here's what I would say, and this is why people were calling this our next Vietnam. I think from the military community, we were talking about this question right here. Everybody is saying, it wasn't worth it, and this was an epic failure, and we lost, and using these very big, harsh words. And I think from our community, we were feeling like this must be what Vietnam veterans felt like when they were coming home. And I think the civilian community were saying, is this our next Vietnam? Because they're watching the embassy happen, right? It was two totally different perspectives. And so I think that what we learned from the Vietnam veterans is it really depends. How you walk out of this situation depends on what kind of meaning you bring to it, right? We get to decide, you get to decide um, what meaning you bring out of Afghanistan. What meaning, like I said earlier, we've spent so much time kind of developing a story of why it was important to be able to, I know our first deployment when Matt went to Afghanistan, the boys and I decided to sponsor an orphanage over there so we could be a part of this thing that he was trying to do that was good, right? Because we were creating meaning of why it was okay for daddy to be gone, right? So when this whole thing kind of like dissolves is what it feels like. It just kind of dissolves, and you're hearing things like we lost and it's a failure, right? It's like, well, why did I give up a year? Why did I thought this was a good thing, and now like what does that all mean, right? Well, I think we have to each go back and we have to say, um, it happened. We were there. We sacrificed for that country. It had definite meaning at the time. It still can have meaning today. And I think we have to remind ourselves that we get to decide what meaning we bring out of it now. Matt used great words in his interview where he said, he's like, I don't want to go back and relive that deployment in Afghanistan. And I wish that the things that had happened and the lives that we lost, of course, I would want them back. He's like, but I don't want to give up what I have now, right? I don't want to give up the friendships that I have. I don't want to give up how I live differently because of that experience. Like there are certain things that we come out of that whole very difficult experience going, we're better people because we went through that, right? We have to be. We have to be better people because of the sacrifice that we gave. And then we get to decide, you get to decide whether or not you want to be better because of it and create meaning out of it, right? Nobody else gets to decide that. Anybody else can decide whether or not it was worth sending that much money over there, or deciding the policy and the strategy and what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Like, let those people decide and do their job, right? But what you get to do is to take the meaning and the sacrifice and the energy that you put forth a 20-year war on terrorism and decide, who am I now because of it? And how am I going to be better to the world around me because I went through that? Whether it's because you're a grittier person than ever, whether you know how to dig deep and it was because of those experiences that you saw something within yourself that you didn't know you had, whether your children have a worldview or can have a worldview that they wouldn't have otherwise had without this being part of your story. You can't take out the fact that chapter 3 happened, right? Chapter 3 happened. You got to experience it. Your spouse got to experience it. It will forever be part of your story, but you get to decide where you write your story from this point forward, how you're going to bring meaning and purpose and goodness out of that. Maybe we're all going to be those veterans that walk around and share our war stories simply because we're trying to create meaning. Or maybe we're going to be the people that serve the next generation with love and kindness, and prepare them for what the future holds for them. But either way, we can give back out of that story. So I think that's where we have to do. I think when people are asking big tough questions like that, I think we have to kind of again turn it off and go, they're asking these questions for those reasons over there, but this is my life, this is what we went through, and this is how I'm going to create meaning for me.
So I want to take that a step further. For
Yeah.
those who lost a loved one over there, can we adopt that same mindset, that same focus on how we live now, knowing that we left someone over there, we lost a loved one who didn't get to come home and live the next chapter of their lives? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and the answer is 100% yes. If you talk to a lot of the gold stars, and I'm sorry to keep going back to the Afghanistan series, but it's that was one of the questions we asked. I brought Krista Simpson Anderson on to say, man, what do we say, right? When you've lost a husband over there, like how do we address that question? And when you have gold star families, and you have even some of our veterans, if they've lost a limb or they have invisible wounds, right? I think all of them would say, most of them would say, if you don't live your life to the fullest, and if you don't find ways to bring meaning out of it, then we're detracting from the meaning, right? Like, I think that if we were counting on winning this war against Afghanistan specifically, and that the only way that any of it was going to make sense or for it to be worth it or for it to have meaning is if we won, right? That's a lot of pressure to put on a war that we're not guaranteed to win, even though I think as America, we kind of, think that that's the guarantee because we're strong, right? And that we exist to fight the nation's wars, and we don't actually, I'm saying this, I wonder if sometimes we plan, what do we do if we don't win, right? But the question is it's not always about victory. It's not all about wins and losses. It's about the fact that even our gold stars would say they're bringing meaning out of it every single day, right? They're living their life to the fullest, and they're living it out in respect to the one that gave their life. It's we see it every time we get to Memorial Day, right? Or Veterans Day, when you see veterans that are posting things on social media saying, please enjoy the hamburger, right? Remember? And then go enjoy the hamburger and the cookout and have fun, right? It's the same thing. We've got to be able to move forward going, we're not going to forget, we're going to acknowledge, we're going to sit in the pocket of what we're feeling, but then we also have the permission, and they're giving us the permission to live fully in gratitude.
And with the 20th anniversary of 9/11 coming up in a few days, I feel like that's an especially important answer. So thank you for that. I think we can all live like that on 9/11 every year as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's a great opportunity this week to reach out to those who were affected by 9/11, reach out to those who signed up because of 9/11, reach out to those that served in Afghanistan or Iraq, thanking them for what they did. The power of a thank you, going back to that first question of what do I do for those that served that I don't know what it's like to serve and I don't know what their experience is like. A big, huge thank you goes a long way, goes a long way.
So I'm going back to some of the questions that the folks tuning in tonight asked. One person asked, how do we help our spouse reintegrate after being over there?
And I'm assuming that question is reintegrates since recently, right?
I would
Um,
assume so, but we could just talk about general reintegration after deployment
yeah.
as well.
And again, I want to just say that the USO You're Leaving Again series, we touched on reintegration. Matt and I both did on what works, what doesn't work. So it's definitely a fantastic, you get a workbook, there's videos, there's so much content on reintegration. So definitely point you to that. But I would say for those that are reintegrating from this recent one was tough. And I'm not saying that it was tough like as if other ones were not tough. Okay. Because I think any experience, depending on what you go through, can have its difficulties with reintegration. But I'll say what made this one in particular very difficult is that this was what I personally am describing as one of the first times we were experiencing some level of wartime or experiencing some level of combat in real time. Like we are all watching on the news as people are trying to evacuate and get off the plane, and we're watching people crawl all over a C-17 and wondering what's going to happen. And we're watching it in real time. And so this was definitely one of those very difficult moments of seeing service members lose their lives and knowing it was a full blackout, right? As those families are being notified. And a lot of us who are mid-seasoned spouses, but I would even say in the last few months and years, it wasn't this real time, right? Like we had like 24 hours, we had maybe even 48 hours. And so this was a real time thing. And so we had situations where we had spouses that were watching the news, knowing their service member was there, dealing with what they were dealing with. And then within a couple hours, getting a phone call from their spouse over there saying, this is really hard. This is really hard. And we did have service members that were saying, that the PTSD that they think that they were going to have from the humanitarian crisis that they were facing was much worse than anything that they had experienced in combat. So I think that said, we have a situation where that's what made it different. This was in some ways different when you add all those variables together of real time, plus we're trying to rush and having a timeline and getting people out, and then we're losing service members, and then we're also dealing with a humanitarian crisis and dealing with a threat. It was way too much for any of our souls or psyches to handle all at once. So if you have a service member that dealt with some of that over there, this is where again I would go back to giving lots more time than usual in your reintegration, lots more patience than usual. There's a lot more to process. I think our service members are used to thinking that they're going to go into a situation and face potential combat, but not feel like they have to play God, which is what some of them said. Like choosing who's going to get on a plane and who's not going to come through the gate for some of them was very, very traumatic. And that's going to be something that they're going to probably need some professional help or some time to process. And so, regardless of whether you were a C-17 crew member that was having to make that tough decision to go down the runway, or whether you were at Abbey Gate or wherever you were, we had lots of soft community that were all kind of everywhere, right? And so, being able to just go, you know what, I'm going to give an extra measure of grace to just let my spouse come home, to settle in, to I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of dip down a little bit before they start kind of being ready to come back out. And that's just their way of processing what they saw. If they can talk about it, fantastic. Even better if they're going to a chaplain or going to someone else who is there to talk about and debrief with what they saw. And depending on what they're dealing with. And so I don't want to quite go down the rabbit hole of like, depending on what they saw, but just give yourself a little bit of extra time. I always tell people in reintegration in general, don't make any huge decisions on anything big in your life for like at least half the duration of the deployment. Right. So if it was a 3-month deployment, don't make any big decisions for at least a month and a half, if not 3 months. Right. If it was, so this was a kind of a short thing, but try to not make any big decisions about life, about finances, about medical procedures that aren't emergencies, like any of those kinds of things. Try not to make any big decisions and give yourself fully time to process what you just went through, and give your spouse some space. But definitely do what we said earlier, check in as you can and be that advocate.
You just gave me goosebumps with that. Thank you for that. What would you tell the spouses who are feeling helpless right now? We're watching the news, and maybe our spouses are talking, maybe they're not, but we're watching the news and we're seeing the humanitarian crisis, and we're seeing so many women and children and civilians in harm's way and being left behind. We're feeling helpless. How can we cope with that? Do you have any tips on what we can do to feel like we're helping, or just maybe some internal strategies?
Yeah, if you feel led to get involved, there's lots of charitable organizations. There's lots of ways that you can get involved, whether you want to donate money and finances or whether you want to donate. There's different organizations that are either taking money to help immigrants get settled, or whether they're actually providing physical help, like setting up apartments and donating a bed or car seats or whatever. So I don't have an exhaustive list of that, but during the Afghanistan series, I did interview my good friend Beena Patel, who is an expert on the women of Afghanistan and the dynamics that happen there. And she shared some extra resources of ways that you can help out. So that's on my landing page for the series, where you can find some of those. And you can also Google ways to help as well. So if you feel the need to want to get involved in like hands and feet, like actually help, then I think there are some ways. I think we have to be patient with ourselves though too, because I know our military and our government and our states even are working very hard right now to help immigrants come in and get settled and figure out what those needs are. Knowing that they're not detainees, right? We can't keep them. They're citizens, and so they need to be able to go if they need to go. But we want to make sure that they have what they need. So it's an evolving current situation, and so be patient as you're trying to find those ways to help. But I think that if that's not something that you're necessarily feeling like you need to rush in to do, I personally think it's okay and it's not selfish to just sit back and wait. It's okay to sit back and wait and know that there is a lot of people that have the influence and the ability to step in and do those things, and that if they need the help, they're going to ask for it, and then we'll find it a right, perfect moment to get involved. But it's also just as important for you to be your best for those that you are immediately responsible for. That it is not selfish for you to take care of yourself, and that doesn't mean that you're letting the world down, that you're letting these families down, you're letting these citizens down, that there are a lot of people that are trying to step in, and that might be their job to actually do that as well. And so get involved if you want to get involved in ways that are already structured and set up for that. You definitely don't want to run to Germany or run to Texas or run to whatever and say, I'm here, what can I do, right? Like that can actually cause chaos. More chaos than we're in already. So, but what you can do is how can I help and find those organizations that are doing that? But it's also, I'm giving you permission to wait. Is that okay? Can I give you guys permission to just wait too and kind of tend to yourself and take care of your heart? And that it is a terrible human feeling to feel helpless when you see people in pain. When things like this happen in the world, I kind of feel, if you've ever seen The Green Mile, I feel like John Coffey on weeks like that. I feel like I'm just absorbing all the suffering and pain of the world. I feel like I'm feeling everyone's emotions. I'm feeling the hurt of everyone, and I feel helpless too. And I feel like I wish I could just fly there and help somebody. And sometimes I hate to say it, but I actually don't hate to say it. The cue for me personally is that's when I need to turn off the news, right? Because I personally cannot jump on a plane and go to Afghanistan and help anybody right now. I'm actually going to make the problem worse, right? What I need to do is I need to turn off the TV. I need to see what I can do and what I can't do, see what my talents are, where I can best give, and also take a look at my family and my marriage and see if there's areas that I need to be attentive to that, because that's what I'm ultimately responsible for first, and start there.
I think that was the perfect way to bring it all back to the very first topic that we covered, which was how to know when it's okay to turn it off and focus on what's 3 feet in front of you, right? And we want to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, our children, if we have them, and of course our spouses, and then broaden it after that. I
Yeah,
see that
and
we don't have anything else in the Q&A box.
can I
And
answer the question that just popped up in the chat? I think it's a valid question, because I think without the proper information, we can find ourselves getting very paranoid and scared, and so can civilians and neighbors and things like that. And so it's a valid question. The question is that neighbors were posing comments like, are we bringing terrorists to the country, right? And should we be scared? And so while we are not getting into politics, and that's very important, I do want to just say, being able to just be very educated with our response and remind everybody that people were vetted, and they were vetted appropriately, and that's the best thing that we can do, is trust those who were part of that process to do the job that they were there to do. And and we all have to move forward that way. Even us as military families, it's a valid concern. So if I can just state that there is a valid concern that I've heard from the spouse community as well, when we have people that are immigrants that are coming in and staying on the installations. I understand that fear, but we got to be able to be educated in our response and remember that people are doing the best that they can to make sure that we're making safe decisions, that we're making decisions that are in the best interest of the humanitarian crisis, and also the best decision possible for our military as well. And so it's a very understandable question.
thank you for that. Corie, what are some resources that people can go to if they want to keep up with what you're doing? Where are you on social media? What's your website? We want to know how we can find out more. And also people who still maybe want to reach out to you or look to you for some resources beyond this event tonight.
Yeah. So, first of all, you can find me on social media. It's the same handle for all of them. It's just at Corie LPC. LPC stands for Licensed Professional Counselor. Took me a long time to get those credentials, so we get proud of them, right? So that's correct. Laura just posted it there. That's my social media. I have two websites. CorieWeathers.com is one of them if you're just wanting to find more information about me. But the main one that you want to know about is life-giver.org. That's where you're going to find the podcast. That's where you're going to find the Life Giver directory, which is designed to help you find professionals that understand your life. So these are mental health providers, coaches, even organizations that have programming to support you. And most of those are military spouses and veterans that are mental health professionals. And there are those that are out there that may not be easy to find on TRICARE, but they are so culturally competent and ready to serve you. And you can search the map and search by whatever the issue is. And so you can find that at that website. You'll also find the Afghanistan series, where I tried, it was no gimmicks, no politics, no debating. The series was really aimed to look at your most important questions, the underlying questions that we're all asking. So you'll find the series there. Laura has already posted the link for that. And then lastly, we recognize, the Life Giver team recognizes that we're all struggling to answer this question, and that some of you might need some extra processing, a safe place where you can really kind of flesh out all of these feelings. And so the Life Giver team, which is a group of military spouses that I supervise and train up, we are offering two small group sessions. Think of it like that. So Thursday for an hour and a half and Friday for an hour and a half, two separate groups, but we're only doing 12 seats for each of those groups, just to have a very intimate place where you can, in a safe place, process with them also helping with some coping skills in case you need it. So they're going to post a link that if you're interested in that, you can apply for it, because we can only do 12 seats. But I guarantee you, if it's something we have more than we can provide, we'll open up new opportunities to do that again. So there's a short application just to let us know which day sounds good to you and all of that. So that's another way that we want to be able to serve you for sure. I know you guys have asked so many questions, and there's so many things that we could discuss. Liz, I'm hoping, could I address one more thing that I think I'm seeing in the spouse culture? Would that be okay? Do we have time for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think the biggest thing that I want to, because you guys have brought up so many great points, and please know our heart is to serve you guys tonight, and that there's so many questions, and we wish that we could get to all of them. It would take us like a whole weekend, right, to really flesh this out. And so I'm going to encourage you to get together with some safe members in your tribe that you feel really connected to, that you can have these tough conversations. Maybe you start off your get together with what your ground rules are, just like we did tonight, where we said, you know what, we need a safe place where we're not going to get into debating politics and opinions, but we just need to process and be in a place where we feel understood. You can do that. You can have your own little kind of debriefing, if you will. And I think that even if it's virtual, that you can do that. I would just encourage you to set those ground rules so it's a positive experience. But I think that what I want to encourage you guys on tonight is this big topic in the spouse culture, which is I recognize that we're coming out of a very long season of exhaustion where many of you are tired. Many of you thought maybe when the Afghanistan thing kind of rolled out, maybe your first thought was relief, right? Like maybe it was like, oh my goodness, this is going to end. Like we're going to slow down. Like I'm going to see my spouse more. I mean, like this is going to get better, And so we kind of started to have these good feelings, and then all of a sudden, like it started to dissolve, and everybody had opinions, and then it got messy, and then your spouse is having feelings, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, I thought I was going to get a break, and now that looks like that break is not going to come for a very long time. Right. And so I just want to acknowledge that if you're feeling that way, that is completely understandable. I did a retreat the weekend before last, and we were processing all this. And one of the things that I said to them was, here's the deal. Whether we recognize it or not, we have kind of switched seasons. You may have thought that a season was ending, and now we have a new season beginning. Okay. And that season can be a lot of things, and it can be also what you want it to be. Okay. But I think it's okay for us to embrace the fact that we have been tired and exhausted, and we've needed a break. It's okay for you to acknowledge that. It's okay for you to get the help that you need so that you can transition into this next season, whatever that looks like, in a different way, taking care of yourself and making sure that you're in a good spot, right? We don't want to go into a transition of a new season already in a deficit with a great amount of need, not taking care of ourselves, because we're really going to decline as a community and as a tribe if that's what's going to happen. Okay. So recognize that this season is shifting, and then we need to ask ourselves individually, what is the next season? Okay. So for example, if you are a caregiver and you have a veteran, let's say, who is really struggling with what happened with Afghanistan, you probably thought that things were going to kind of like simmer down, and you've done all this hard work, and all of that hard work to process the war on terrorism and its impact on not only your spouse's life, but yours, was not in vain. Okay. It means that you've done all of this wonderful hard work, and you are not starting over. It just means it's kind of like when you move and you relocate and you have small children and they regress just a little bit, they take a backward step, and you got them all the way to here with potty training, right? And now we're like, oh, we got to relearn this again. We got to go back a step. But that doesn't mean that your child doesn't remember anything that you taught them, right? And so just know that if you find yourself taking a step back and reprocessing things and not quite getting the relief that you were hoping that you were going to get, or the respite that you thought you were going to get, we're just kind of in a little bit of a transition. We're going to get ourselves caught back up. And that can be done really well when you have conversations, open conversations within your marriage of, all right, here's where we are. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's what I need. I have some resentment and some frustration to get out. I need to find a safe, healthy place to do that. You have your feelings. What do you need? And how are we going to get from here to here? And what does that look like for us? Be intentional, map that out as best as you can, and make this next season healthy. Okay. Let's not find ourselves going into a further decline, whatever that looks like. Does that make sense to everybody? If you're still here with me, say yes in the chat. I want to see that you heard what I said. Does that make sense that we are transitioning into a new season and you get to decide what this new season looks for you? Do not go backwards. Do not forget to take care of yourself. You are just as important as your service member. You are just as much, you are not the backbone of your family. You two together, if you're married, are the backbone of your family. Together, you both matter. You both have value. So take care of each other, take turns taking care of each other, and that should be constantly moving around, and make sure you're also doing the things to take care of yourself. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm glad we had this chat, everybody.
That was perfect, Corie. Thank you. I think we're all going to take that to heart, and we're all going to, whether we're going to bed or we're just waking up, we're all going to take that and really breathe that in for a little while. I think that was really good for our souls, as was the last hour. So thank you so much, Corie, for being with us and for sharing your heart and sharing your expertise with us. If anybody would like to continue the conversation, we're going to open up a string on this in the USO Military Spouse Facebook group. Of course, look for Corie's website, either Life Giver or the Corie Weathers website. Reach out if you're interested in attending one of her sessions later on this week. And please feel free to always reach out to the team members at the USO if you need anything. A recording will be available of this, hopefully within the week, uso.org/MVP. And please look for more Coffee Connection live episodes, both from the past and coming up soon, about topics that'll bring us all together on one note or another. So again, thank you so much for being with us tonight, Corie, and to everyone who joined us tonight. We appreciate you, and we're here for you, and we are your tribe. We're going to get through this together. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you to the team.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.